Welcome to the High Existence Podcast. I am your host, John Brooks. And I just want to say thank you to everyone who's been listening to the podcasts for the last couple of weeks. I can see that the listeners are growing week by week. We're getting some great reviews. And if you haven't already left one, then I would love for you to do so when you have just a few minutes spare. In this episode, this is episode 20, I team up with the director of High Existence, Jordan Bates, and we speak to the amazing Akira the Don. Since Jordan leads this conversation, I think it's best if I switch it over to him to introduce this episode and tell you what's in store. So, Jordan Bates.
Hey, what's up everyone? Jordan Bates here. Welcome again to this episode of the High Existence Podcast. We're truly glad to have you here. We love you. Thank you for listening and thank you for existing. Today we are mega excited to have Akira the Don on the show. Akira is something of a musical philosophical wizard. He's been called the DJ of the intellectual dark web, and he's the innovator of a new genre of music called Meaningwave. He samples Terence McKenna, Alan Watts, Jordan Peterson, Hunter S. Thompson, David Foster Wallace, Elon Musk, Jocko Willink, David Goggins, and a variety of other philosophers, thinkers, artists, and inspiring figures. He then synchronizes these samples in truly delicious ways with a wide array of gorgeous beats that he conjures up to create a uniquely enchanting and mind-expanding listening experience. His album, The Path with Jocko Willink, has been particularly influential for me lately. It's a ridiculously motivational album, and I highly recommend it, along with the rest of his work. We will be interluding some of his music throughout this episode, so you can get a taste of his art. Akira is an extraordinarily insightful and entertaining individual, and we had a ton of fun in this episode exploring a vast, vast expanse of territory. We discuss everything from space migration and the Jungian shadow to transcendental experiences and the wonders of being alive in 2019, as well as the shadows. And it was just a lot of fun to have this conversation. So without further ado, let's get into it. I hope you enjoy this Technicolor journey as much as we did.
Akira. He's got clout. You gotta be oriented towards something, because otherwise you're disoriented. You just spin around in circles and then you suffer, and so do people around you. It's not a good solution. Orient yourself towards something. You have to figure out what it is. What will work for you? What goal would justify the suffering of your life?
I figured I would just kind of launch straight into a somewhat meaty subject, I guess. And when I think of you, I think of sort of someone who's like hyper optimistic about the present moment, about where humanity is right now and kind of where we're headed. And I wondered if you might start off by just giving our listeners a taste of kind of why you feel. Oh, you can explain, is that accurate, and then give a taste of why you feel the way you do about the present moment and kind of where we're headed as a species.
Yeah, well, obviously it's the best time to be alive in recorded human history. Like, woohoo! What a time to be alive! Look at us! Look at us! We're in the future! We're in the future! It's amazing! Look how wonderful it all is! Look around you! No one threw a brick at you today. No one threw a brick at you. You stepped outside your door and no one threw a brick at you. Flipping amazing. Look, reach in your pocket. You have a supercomputer. You can do anything with it. You could start your own radio show or a TV show or talk to your mum or your grandmother in a different country. You can hook up a date for later. You could go swipe about and find someone to have sex with in 33 minutes. Holy crap. You can do anything you wanted. And look, your children, they're learning to code. Look at your 3-year-old playing Minecraft. He's a coding genius already, and he's 3. What's he going to do when he's 20? What's he going to do when he's 20? What were you going to do when we're 20? What is the world going to look like when we're 20? Holy cow, as long as we don't blow each other up. But we won't blow each other up because nobody seems to want to anymore, because war seems to be almost a thing of the past at this point, certainly in civilized countries and multiplying every day. It's like almost the whole world is deeply civilized. It's almost terrifying. What happens happens when everybody's deeply civilized? What do we do? Holy cow. Anyway, yeah, so it's definitely a beautiful day to be alive. It's definitely the peak of recorded human history, and I do say recorded human history because it's certainly possible that at some point in the deep distant past we did all of this and then broke it and then had to start again. Violent sunspot activity could destroy everything in 3 seconds. However, if that does not occur, I think we're doing pretty good. We're going to be doing pretty good, and we're going to see some astounding things within our lifetimes. My grandmother is 95. She saw the radio. She saw TV. She saw the internet. All these things born, and here we are. What will we see before we die? Holy cow! Goodness. Anyway, yeah. So that's how I feel about that.
Bravo! That was a really beautiful monologue capturing the reasons to be optimistic.
Yeah, they're about to legalize mushrooms.
Snap for that. Yeah, we actually had a psilocybin truffle retreat in Amsterdam a few months ago that we hosted ourselves. So psilocybin truffles are legal in Amsterdam, which is pretty cool. But hopefully the global psychedelic sort of ban begins to lift more and more in the coming years.
Well, Trump's looking into it right now, apparently.
That would seem quite remarkable. I haven't heard about that.
yeah. This is word around town, word around the campfires I've been attending suggests that Trump is looking into that right now. I think Colorado might be doing it first in a similar fashion to how they were early with the weed thing, and now that's being rolled out everywhere. Weed will be completely federally legal within 2 years in the United States of America.
That's an optimistic projection in characteristic flavor. I hope you're right. I would not be surprised within 5-10 years, but I mean, Canada made it happen already, so I guess the U.S. can't be too far behind.
Yeah, it's working very well. Trump's very into it. Trump already legalized hemp on a level, so hemp production's going into overdrive in the United States, and that's about to be like a massive industry in this country, cool. Which is a wonderful thing. And obviously CBD and all that sort of thing is now legal everywhere. It's legal in lots of states now. It's legal in California, where I am. There's a weed store just around the corner from my studio. I can see it out of this window almost. It's basically like an Apple store for weed. It literally looks like an Apple store. Everyone's wearing these red shirts. It's called MedMen. You go in there and people run over and like, oh, what can we help you with? And we've got this and we've got that, and it's all clean. And it's not one of these situations where it's like 2 locked doors and a guy with a shotgun, like which is how it is in West Hollywood. And this is the future. And I'm pretty certain that Trump will do this. I mean, he on a federal level. One, it's making too much money for it to make sense not to do it. 2, this would secure a huge amount of the youth vote. And it just doesn't make sense not to. But then on the psychedelic side of things, that's all being looked into at the moment, and there's obviously lots of compelling evidence around at the moment for psychedelics treating PTSD and things of that nature. Lots of money's being put into the research. Lots of very serious people are talking about it.
Yeah, I actually wanted to ask you about the role that psychedelics have played in your development as a person, as an artist. If you could talk a bit about that.
In the second to last psychedelic peak, I need to come up with a better word for this. I'm referring to the 7-year oscillation between punk and psychedelic, or sort of nihilism and joy, or whatever, however you want to put it. Society flips backwards and forwards every 7 years. And according to my calculations, the first one I noticed peaked around 91, 92. Which is when I was a little boy, and Acid House and all that sort of thing was going on, and the Shaman made a record with Terence McKenna, which was a very big influence on little me. And around the time of the second one, when I was living on my own in London and in my late teens, they legalized mushrooms briefly, which was quite astounding. In around 2000. They were legalized, and that according to my calculations was like the peak of that psychedelic swing. And for that summer, they legalized psychedelics, which is insane. And the year prior to that, I'd been walking around with a bottle of liquid acid in my pocket at all times, and I would sort of dose myself all day. I was a music journalist at that point and a rapper, and I would just sort of wander from gigs to basements to recording studios in a state of constant trip, and dosing everybody I came across, and reading lots of Aldous Huxley. And it's probably all Hunter S. Thompson's fault, because I got into Hunter S. Thompson when I was about 15, and I left home just before I was 16, and went out into the world and fancied myself as a sort of nouveau Hunter S. Thompson rock star music journalist hybrid, and ran around getting myself into trouble and sort of creating the story. And it's an easy way to create a story. I used to have a column that I wrote, and every week it would get more and more ridiculous, and it's like, well, how can we beat last week? And it's like, oh, what if I got someone to come over with a large amount of mushrooms, and see what that did to everybody that I've brought back from the club, which was about 30 people, and that kind of thing. I was in my youth, I was very sort of experimental in that area of things, quite deliberately. And I read Aldous Huxley and Thompson and all these people, and it was kind of like a controlled, continuous experiment for a good number of years. And it was very influential.
Interesting. Were there any particularly notable mystical experiences that you had with psychedelics that you remember having a particular impact, as being some just a particular like rite of passage or a turning point or unlocking a new vision or new capacities?
The first one happened without any kind of external input. No, it didn't. Oh, this is interesting, because there's a thing that I've always thought about my past. I had an experience in Bangor, in North Wales, after school one day when I was like 15 or 15, I think. And I went down to the shopping centre area after school, like everybody does. And I sat down on what was called the 50p's, which were these sort of benches shaped like a 50p piece. And for no good reason, as seeming to me at the time, all of a sudden I could see everything that had ever been in that position and ever would be. Just for a split second, like all the buildings were as tall as they ever were, and they were at their foundational level. And every person kind of trailed back as far as they'd walked, and as far into the future as I could see them, like a worm sort of. But like when you, like if your computer crashes and you're dragging your mouse and suddenly there's like loads of arrows behind it. That coil thing. So suddenly everything that had ever been in that space and ever would be was all at once, just for a second. There was a very long second, occupying that second, but then it was gone. And that changed me quite fundamentally. But I realise now, just because we're talking just now, they used to grow mushrooms behind the science block in my school. And like we went through a period of having these like house parties around that period, and when we were having our first sort of like forays into drinking booze as teenagers and that sometimes, and we did mushrooms sometimes. Well, we ate mushrooms as well, and I'd forgotten about that. So I wonder if that was connected. I don't know. I hadn't been like eating mushrooms all day at school and then gone down and that happened, but it was around the period of time that stuff was going on.
Interesting. And I've heard you talk as well, kind of on a related note, about aiming to create transcendent experiences with music as a DJ during live sets, and kind of comparing concerts to sort of like modern religious rites or experiences of ritual transcendence. I was wondering if you might elaborate on this a bit, and do you see a connection there between like psychedelic mystical experiences and transcendent music experiences? Presumably you do.
Yeah, if you're doing it properly, that's exactly what it is. The issue is that not a lot of people do it properly. But if you're doing it, if you're putting enough care and attention into it, like you've got a whole load of people gathered, they're dancing, they're intoxicated in some fashion. Just the act of dancing itself is intoxicating, particularly with lots of other people. So you have the setting for a shared communal transcendent experience. So if you mix the music correctly, and if you move it correctly from one thing to another, you can create situations where people have transcendent experiences. You can create situations where people all burst into tears at the same time, which is something I've done and seen happen.
Forget that you were dreaming. so that you would think it was all for real, and to be anxious about it, because it'd be so great when you woke up. I wonder what you would do if you had the power to dream any dream you wanted. I wonder what you would do if you had the power to dream any dream you wanted. Any dream you wanted. Any dream you wanted. Any dream you wanted. I wonder what you would do if you had the power to dream any dream you wanted.
You know, it's tricky because it's each person is like an ingredient, and one person with the wrong kind of energy can fuck the whole thing up. Like, you can be DJing and you can feel someone negative walking into the room and their vibe kind of like spreading through stuff. And there's things you can do to remedy that. There's certain records you can play that will off balance that. There's record you can create, for example, you could say play a DMX record and an MOP record back to back, which would get everyone super aggressive, and then transition that into something very, very beautiful at us, like jump up, say 2 octaves. Just moving a couple of octaves will kind of like make things feel godly. But if you combine that with like a BPM ramp and a kind of some textures in the music that might be like a female voice but not saying specific words, that will dissipate that anger and turn it into a sort of like a washing of joy over everybody, which is a very sort of spiritual feeling. And then if you follow that with the right stuff, then you can move things into truly godly territory. But yeah, anyway, this is completely possible, and it's what good DJs do all the time. Before I was a good DJ, I used to MC. Well, I used to rap, but I would sometimes MC for other DJs, and I would get people to sort of come together and look up in the sky and worship the what you call it, disco ball, glitter ball, mirror ball, and things of that nature. And just doing little things like that, reminding people of them all being together and getting them to have little acts of prayer in the midst of a club dance floor experience, like, goes a long way to creating that thing. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, that's fascinating to kind of hear about the intricacies of sort of creating this particular recipe with different songs in a particular order to kind of correct for like a dark energy that entered the room.
Yeah, it does. And, you know, depending on the people in the room, because you want to be, with a great DJ set, it's you want to have things that you know. You also want to have things that you don't know. You want to be in that area between kind of... It's like with anything useful and great in life. You want to be sort of between competence and disaster. Just, you want to be like right on the edge where everything could completely fuck up, but where you know enough to like stop that from happening. But you always want to be in the area where it could fuck up. So if you're DJing and it's like you're just playing stuff that you know will work, and you know the audience will like, and you're not taking any chances or anything, you won't achieve that transcendent experience, because so much of it works subliminally, and so much of it is a case of your energy going out to them, then their energy coming back to you, and this feedback loop of that going on and on and on. And if everything you're doing is predictable, then you won't get that danger energy, and that danger energy is where things get really, really mystical and dope and transcendent. So you have to be kind of walking the tightrope between that. But you have to be giving them the stuff, and a decent amount of stuff that is stuff that they love and know. Particularly in like a nostalgic fashion. If you give stuff things that like remind them of when they were first listening to music, like a bit of that's like that nostalgic feeling is very, 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 very powerful. But then if you couple that with the opposite of that, with the complete unknown and a futuristic unknown as well, then that's a very powerful recipe also. There's a lot going on in that stuff.
Yeah, when you're in the midst of that and you're orchestrating the vibe and the energy and basically kind of guiding the evolution of the energy of a room, what does that feel like? Is there a feeling of sort of being in a position of being almost like a wizard or enchanting people?
Well, yeah, that is what it is. But when you're doing it and you're doing it properly, you're like that involved in it that you're not thinking too much. Like everything else, when it's really great and you're doing it to your greatest ability, and when you're playing on equipment that you know inside out, so you could do it with your eyes closed and everything else just melts away and you're completely in the moment. You're all in the moment together. So you and the audience are in the same thing, and you might be conducting it, but like I was saying, because the energy they're giving back when it gets into that really powerful feedback loop, it's like, say you could play a record and that will send a ripple through the whole crowd of sort of ecstasy or joy or shock or something. But if you do it powerfully and correctly enough, the energy that comes back to you will be just as shocking and powerful as what you gave to them. So you're kind of in the same position, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Just like a circulating, transcendent or mystical energy.
Yeah, and it's like I play 4-hour DJ sets like twice a lot, a couple times a week usually, and 4 hours is a long time. And if you're doing it properly, your 4 hours is a story with a beginning and a middle and an end, and it's this vast journey with like mini journeys in between it. I kind of think of it like a trilogy of movies. So it would be like 3 great movies in making one ultra movie. And if the shape of it is correct and all that sort of thing, you can really do something that changes people forever in one night, in 4 hours, with a bunch of records, a couple hundred records or something. You can give people a feeling that they will carry with them for the rest of their life, that will be sort of fizzing about their psyche and their consciousness like for all their days, and will come back to them in moments when they need it.
Yeah, that's something
I was just wondering, do you structure this just based on your own intuition? Like, how did you learn? What guides you in giving people this kind of experience?
Yeah, just intuition. And also, I was going to clubs not as a DJ for a long, long time, so I know what worked for me. And I've known some great DJs over the years. When I was living in London, I was friends with a brilliant DJ called Errol Alkan, and I used to hang out with him at the DJ booth and watch him work, so I obviously soaked up a lot of stuff from him. We play completely different music, but he used to play really long sets that would take people on a glorious transformative journey. And his thing was he just loved music and knew his music really well. People often ask me like, oh, what do I need to buy to be a DJ? What software should I use? All this sort of thing. And that's the least important thing. The most important thing is the music and knowing the music, and therefore knowing when it's going to be the right time to play certain bits of music and in what order, and the combinations and what those combinations do. This plus this equals this. And so it's, a lot of it's been a lot of trial and error. And also, I was a music producer as well for many years before I was DJing. So I approach DJ sets like a big song. You're making a song, it's like that drum plus that snare, that hi-hat, that chord, that key, da-da-da. Like a DJ set, if you zoom out of it, it's like a big song, and you can think of it in that way. Or a big album.
I think that's something beautiful and incredible about transcendent or mystical experiences, is that in a matter of just a few hours with psychedelics or with ritual musical ecstasy or with ecstatic dance or whatever it happens to be,
exercise.
You can have exercise or any number of things. You can have an experience that just basically is a turning point, changes things forever and sticks with you for the rest of your life. That's
this is why Scott Adams doesn't listen to music. Scott Adams says he doesn't listen to music because it's far too powerful. He studies persuasion. That's his area of expertise. So he's aware of how persuadable humans are and how, just combinations of words can be incredibly persuasive to a scary degree. But he's like, music is way, 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 way more powerful than anything else in that regard. Like, a bit of music can completely change how you feel, and not just for that moment, it could actually do it forever.
That's fascinating, and I was going to ask if you might elaborate on the meaning of the phrase "squeegeeing the third eye." I've heard you use this phrase, and I think maybe it connects to this discussion of transcendent mystical experiences. What do you mean by squeegeeing the third eye?
I don't think I ever said that. Do you know Bill Hicks used to say that? Maybe I have said it. I don't know. I don't remember saying it recently. But that's something Bill Hicks always used to say. Bill Hicks, he was a comedian, and he was an interesting guy because he was a combination of like utter misanthrope, but also like joyful optimist. And he was a very trippy guy, but at the same time, he was quite materialist, and he was an hardcore atheist, and a sort of traditional lefty, and he was very into mushrooms and acid and stuff. And he was always talking about squeegeeing one's third eye. And he was one of these guys who took mushrooms, and that completely changed him and made him realize that, we are... how did he put it? I can't remember. It was basically about kind of realizing that there's way more to it than what your regular senses talk about. What your regular senses would lead you to believe, if that's all you were paying attention to. So it's the awareness of our interconnectivity, of how much more there is, how we are all, love, and a sort of, we are God experiencing itself and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think I heard you mention the phrase. You must have been referencing Bill Hicks on the Rebel Wisdom podcast. But yeah, that's...
I mean, this is what the Alan Watts record I released last month was all about. The everyday, ordinary consciousness that we have leaves out more, takes out more than it leaves in. Or leaves out more than it takes in. And that's the thing you really realize when you have some kind of psychedelic experience. Is like, oh shit, there's all this other stuff, and the stuff that we're experiencing is but a tiny, tiny bit of this fucking vast, infinite stuff.
Right, it's sort of like Aldous Huxley's reducing valve idea, that kind of our ordinary everyday consciousness is sort of the drip coming out of a giant reducing valve, and that it needs to be this way because we wouldn't be able to sort of cross the street if we were constantly in touch with the sort of unfathomable sublimity and vastness of the cosmos. But then psychedelics sort of temporarily remove the reducing valve, or sort of widen the channel, and you just get a download of a much more expansive picture of things.
Yeah, but we're very limited, so we can't do like multiple things at once. So like your legs will stop working or something like that while all that's going on. Like, you can't do all of it. That's the thing. We're relatively limited, sort of simple creatures, and there's a lot going on. But here's the thing with the squeegeeing the third eye. It's like, once it's been done, it's been done. It's like the genie it's like the Pandora's box thing. It's like, once it's out, you can't put it back in. Now, it might get a bit dusty and you might start to forget a bit, but it's always there. There is always, that window is always there, and once the so-called third eye has been squeegeed, it is there. You're not gonna like cover it up with a big layer of skin or something. It's there, and that's you done for life. And that's whether it's a psychedelic experience or a musical experience or just a really good conversation that you have or something like that. We all have these things at certain points of our life if we kind of pay any kind of attention.
I'm curious about what role you think squeegeeing the third eye and transcendence, mysticism, spirituality, what role do these things have in sort of the current stage for humanity, like helping us overcome our present challenges and transition to whatever the next phase is in our evolution?
They're invaluable. Invaluable. It won't happen otherwise, but it's happening. Again, it's like the Pandora box thing. It's like, it's happening whether anybody wants it to or not, and it keeps happening in giant waves. And because of the nature of the internet and the interconnectivity of modern man, it's like every time it happens, it happens way bigger and affects way more people. I think of it like a pendulum swinging backwards and forwards, and every time it swings further and harder, and the impact is greater. And so as we move into this new psychedelic renaissance, this new 7-year period, social media, internet, all of these things means the impact will be way greater than it had been previously. There are literally channels on YouTube where people show you how to trip properly. There's like this, the whole thing I've been saying for a while of like, there's 12-year-olds on YouTube who'll teach you how to do everything, now extends to that. And the effects of that cannot be underestimated. The other side of this is that what I talk about a lot, which is like Minecraft children for whom the world is infinitely trippy. You know, my son's 6 and he's been playing Minecraft for a couple of years, and he opens up portals, and the fact that opening portals is in his everyday language, and he just assumes this is something you can do, and while he can do it digitally on his iPad and stuff, he thinks that the same thing could be done in real life and doesn't see why that would be a weird idea. Like this sort of trippy language that was previously an esoteric thing understood by a few people and in some dusty old paperbacks or some Grant Morrison comic books or whatever, is now, like, thanks to meme culture and things of that nature, is now sort of populism. It's like mass culture, and it's only going to increase. And as I said, once these genies are out the bottle, they don't go back in. So once you have, like, a generation that just assumes they can create whatever they want and just assumes the truth of the psychedelic experience rather than it being like a weird little thing that a few people did, then obviously society is fundamentally changed, and consciousness itself is fundamentally changed.
Beautiful. I'm curious if you think these subjects of psychedelics, transcendence, mysticism are kind of under-discussed in the so-called intellectual dark web. You've kind of been called, like, I've heard you called something like the DJ of the intellectual dark web. You kind of feature a lot of the people associated with this group in your music, and I sort of see part of what you're doing as almost like injecting some of psychedelia and mysticism into the intellectual dark web by cross-pollinating fans of Terence McKenna and Alan Watts with Jordan Peterson and Eric Weinstein, stuff like this. I don't know if you could riff on that for a minute.
Yeah, I mean, it's very deliberate. Well, there's a plan. There's a, I mean, Meaningwave, which is the music I'm doing, I think of as an audio hypersigil. So it's an audio hypersigil with the intention of elevating the consciousness of all humans who encounter it, and ultimately turning everybody into superheroes, which is where we're going, and that's how we save the world and transcend the issues that are manifesting themselves at the moment.
There is only hard work, late nights, early mornings, practice, rehearsal, repetition, study, sweat, blood, toil, frustration, and discipline. Discipline. There must be discipline.
And with regards to the so named by Eric Weinstein intellectual dark web, what we have there, I would say Jordan Peterson is doing what Alan Watts did in the 60s with Western culture. So he's reintroducing, because it got lost to a couple of generations. They weren't even aware of their sort of spiritual heritage. So he's reintroducing that sort of Christian Western foundation to people. So you need your foundation before you go anywhere, otherwise you drown and sink, and you can build nothing without a foundation. So once you have your foundation, then you can move on to the other things. So it's all happening pretty fast. It's all happening pretty speedily. And a lot of Peterson's ideas are things that McKenna was talking about, and are things that Watts was talking about, just from a slightly different angle. So all these things interconnect, and there's basically what I've been doing musically is kind of taking people's perspectives, looking at the same thing. So I get a bunch of people looking at the same thing and get all those perspectives so the listener can get that, and then find out their truth amidst them, and then move on to the next level and the next level and the next level. So people often ask me, like, oh, when are you going to do such and such a person? And I think of it like, in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, you had to start with Iron Man. You couldn't go straight in with Doctor Strange, because that would have been weird. So you start with a foundational thing that's recognizable in our world and makes sense, and then the things that seem stranger, you can bring those in bit by bit by bit, and it seems normal and natural and makes sense. But you kind of have to take that journey. So, kind of answer to your question, all of these people, I think they're all aware. Jordan Peterson knows full well who Terence McKenna is, and he's talked about a lot of that stuff. He doesn't talk about it a lot because I think he is doing the Iron Man movie, part of the MCU, or that's what he has been doing. I think he's actually now ready to move on to the next stage. So yeah, that's what's going on, and it's going to be quite a dramatic shift But I always talk about this. I talk about it a lot. But we're going into this new psychedelic stage. Next year is the peak of mainstream nihilism and darkness, and so the underground is swinging back to psychedelic like now. So it's going to become more and more and more mainstream, and we'll get to the point in what year is it now? Yeah, 2020, 2027, 2026, 2027 will be trippy, mainstream, trip the fuck out, and everything will be quite wildly different.
Psychedelic Jordan Peterson coming right up. Like,
you can go look it up. He talks about this stuff. He talked about the psychedelics and
right, yeah. On the Future Thinkers podcast, I think he had a really good conversation about psychedelics.
That's one of my favorite podcasts. I love the Future Thinkers podcasts, and they're great, and they see it. Jordan Hall, formerly Greenhall.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's a great person to look at. He's very good at. I talk about this quite a lot, but I think it's very important to keep in touch with popular culture and pay attention to popular culture for many reasons. But if you don't know where you're where you're from, then you don't know where you are, and if you don't know where you are, you don't know where you're going, and all of these things are necessary. And if you don't pay attention to what popular culture is doing, you can't communicate with fucking half of the world, half of the people, and you also can't incorporate that stuff into your own work and your own art or whatever it is you're doing, and it's very, very necessary. And he's very good at that, and he's going to be an important voice coming in.
I think so too. Yeah, I've kind of wondered when we might see Jordan Hall or Daniel Schmachtenberger featured on one of your albums.
You will. Schmachtenberger is another. I met both of these guys, and they're very, very interesting. And it's like if I had put their stuff out last year, no one would have got it, or a few people would have got it. You'd have got it. A lot of people wouldn't have got it. If I do it next year, it will be understood more. I get this a lot, like just this. I try and answer all my YouTube comments every morning on the way into the studio, and every day there's tons of people going, I found you via Peterson, now I've got into Alan Watts, and this thing is blowing my mind, and da 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 da. And there's like lots of that. There's lots of people going on this journey, and it starts in a place of common sense because common sense was lacking, and then it goes deeper, and that will be the journey over the next few years.
I love the master plan. Getting a glimpse of that. I'm curious who any of the other Doctor Stranges of the future would be that you'd like to highlight, who are too incomprehensible at the moment.
Yeah, well,
for most people,
there's a lot, and I don't like talking about things that are coming up until they're done. For the most part, for various reasons. Sometimes things don't happen, or sometimes I don't know. I was just on the Jordan Peterson podcast, and I didn't tell anybody until it was actually out. Well, until he tweeted about it. I used to do that a lot. I talk about things that I was thinking about and things that hadn't happened yet, and I don't know. Sometimes it would curse things. I don't know. It's a weird thing. There's part of it is like there's a truth in talking things into existence, and that being a powerful thing to do. There's a powerful thing in kind of faking it until you make it. A lot of hip hop is built upon that. People talking their dreams into existence. But with regards to this, I'd probably rather not reveal things until it's the right time, because when it's the right time, that's the right time. Yeah.
Sure, I feel you. Absolutely.
What would you like to see? Who would you like to hear?
So definitely Schmachtenberger and Hall, and I would love to hear maybe Charles Eisenstein, possibly, or David Hawkins. I don't know if you're familiar with those guys.
Not the former, the latter I listened to something a few weeks ago. Any stuff like that, do send it over. Anything you think I should listen to or look at.
Cool. Yeah, I'll do that.
Because there's one thing, which is there's a lot of ideas I'm looking forward to discussing, but some of those ideas have only been discussed in my knowledge by dead people or people for whom there is no audio recording, and I'm sure there are contemporaries of these people that I haven't come across yet. So
right, yeah, it's astonishing what you find in the depths of YouTube when you kind of just become a YouTube archaeologist and really dig in. It's like the layers just keep unfolding.
Yeah. Well, I discovered Rupert Spira not long ago through Naval, And then it's like, holy shit, this guy's fantastic, and he's around right now, and he's talking about things in a very, very understandable fashion with a really beautiful, soothing voice. This is like perfect for my needs. And there's a fucking infinity of people out there to discover, and that's very exciting.
Yeah, it is. I haven't heard of Rupert Spira, so I'll have to...
Oh, check out Rupert Spira. He's in a similar furrow to Watts, but in a kind of dreamier. You know, like Watts is something of a trickster. Watts is something of a Loki figure almost. Spira is like a sort of beautiful, kindly, old sort of presence feeling, but he describes all that sort of like Godhead stuff that Watts was talking about in a very beautiful sort of visually appealing fashion. I did one song with him so far, which you should check out. It's very beautiful, called I Had to Become Like You So That You Could Become Like Me. He was talking about how certain like adepts, some people are born knowing full well exactly where they came from and what they are in the context of everything, but they have to forget that and unlearn it and relearn it in order to be able to transfer that information to other people.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, but that's some real shit. Because it's like, what use are you? If you want to be useful, because that's basically what we want to do, right? I had this profound under sort of like enlightenment moment when I realized the truth of Thomas the Tank Engine, or Thomas the Train as he's known in America, which is a kid's story about like an anthropomorphic, is that the right word? Train with a big fucking face.
Yeah.
And this, I used to think of it as like this awful horror story. I was like, you got this train and he's confined to a track and he can't get off the track, and there's this fat controller telling him to do all this stuff, and he's always just like running around with a big smile on his face saying, I'm a useful engine, la 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 la. And I used to think of it like The Prisoner, and they're on this island and they can never get off this island, these trains. And I was like, God, this is fucking evil. This is a horror story. And then one day I was like, I was watching it with my son when he was like 2. I was like, holy shit, this is the fucking truth of everything. Like, we're all confined to our tracks in these bodies, in this life. All we can do is, like, you know, we can't get off them. We can't get out of it. We're stuck on this island. But the best thing we can do is be useful to each other and to us going forward. That's actually the best fucking thing we can do, is be useful engines and bear our suffering smilingly and not moan and fucking do some useful shit. Holy cow, Thomas the Train, you bad motherfucker. And yeah, that was a beautiful moment for me. And so yeah, you know, be useful. How can we be useful? And you can't be useful if you're just completely enlightened, but you can't transfer that knowledge to anybody else. You're useless. What's the point of an enlightened person sat up a tree doing fuck all for anybody else? Nothing. So yeah, we got to work out how to be useful.
Got to embody that sort of bodhisattva energy of kind of attaining higher degrees of enlightenment, but then bringing it back down into kind of service still, and attempting to liberate others and create useful, beautiful things from a place of love. And yeah.
Exactly. And you know, like we were saying earlier, it's one of these things when you bring that shit down from the mount, when you bring down those tablets, once they're down, and if that knowledge is passed on in a mimetic fashion, you can't undo that. You know, the mass consciousness is forever changed a bit, it's forever leveled up a little bit, and you can't go back down. It's like you look at video footage of people in the 70s, it's a different species. If you look at people in the 40s, it's a different species. And even now, it's like just the sort of casual mistrust of sort of authority and things of that nature that is just standard now was not the case just a few decades ago, but there's no undoing that. There's no going back on that. It's like the stuff that Bill Hicks would talk about. It's like, yeah, everyone knows that now. There's nothing sort of shocking or radical about Bill Hicks's message in 2019. In 1998, it was shocking and radical, and that's just 20 years.
Yeah, I was gonna mention a moment ago, as I think that's a really interesting point about how we're almost like a different species every few decades. Before I forget, I was just gonna mention that another Rupert would be Rupert Sheldrake, who maybe if you know about would be a good one to sample, and maybe Robert Anton Wilson at some point.
So okay, Little spoiler, Rob Anton Wilson is one of the people I've been working towards from the very beginning.
Ah, that's beautiful. Yeah, I sort of think of, the other day I tweeted something about how like the OG intellectual dark web is like Robert Anton Wilson, Terence McKenna, Aldous Huxley, Alan Watts, Carl Jung.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. This is very true. And then there's a generation between them, which includes people like Grant Morrison. Weirdly, I don't know why so many of those people work in comic books. You had Grant Morrison and Alan Moore and Neil Gaiman, and a bunch of people who kind of embodied that kind of thought in the sort of 80s, perhaps. Yeah, in the 80s and 90s. A load of them were in comics. I don't know if there's anyone in comics right now. I can't think. I mean, I could be. I'm not reading that many comics because they haven't been very good lately. But I can't think of anyone of that fucking level in comics right now, apart from those people who are already there. Someone could probably educate me on this. If anyone out there knows of anyone of equal or comparable sort of power, please let me know.
Yeah, I can't really think of any, but I'm not really hip to the current comic scene. But yeah, I think of R. Crumb as well as one of those sort of psychedelic comic artists that was doing some really visionary stuff.
Yeah, and who was it who wrote American Splendor?
I do not know.
Crumb illustrated that. They made a film about him. He was... Oh, fucking hell. Hang on. I'm going to have a look this up. Because I love that guy and I've read a ton of his stuff and it's annoying that I can't remember his name. American Splendor. Oh, shit. Sorry. I nearly navigated away from our chat. Anyway, yes. Yeah, there you go. Harvey Pica, who was just like a regular blue-collar guy who worked in a post office and was bald and couldn't get a girlfriend and had a shitty life, and he just like wrote little stories about it and got people to turn them into comic books, and it was fucking amazing. It was like the transcendence of the everyday with that thing, because it's kind of rare that you get that. The stories of the ultra just regular, put in all of its beauty and all of its glory and tragedy and sorrow and horror. It's people who are often too busy trying to make stories about like the super heroic or the super strange or whatever. But like, I always think about how everything is contained in everything. If you look at snow under a microscope, every level you zoom in, you see something different, and you see something that exists in the larger world. Like all medieval architecture exists at one level of zooming in on snow under a microscope. It's insane. And then you zoom in another level and it's like bolts and stuff of that nature. And then you zoom in another level, it's all weaponry. So everything is always contained in everything. And the heroic, the heroic and the super heroic exists in the seemingly mundane.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
And yeah, it kind of reminds me of actually something Charles Eisenstein was talking about recently. He actually had a couple conversations with Daniel Schmachtenberger recently, so those might interest you. But he was talking about how we started to reach a point as a culture where every sort of story, every TV show, cartoon, movie is about these super heroic themes, these sort of larger than life themes. It's always like a fight to save the universe, to save the galaxy. And he was talking about how this can kind of desensitize us to, we're so overstimulated with these epic narratives that it can desensitize us to perceiving the sort of wonders of more mundane day-to-day existence. So yeah, I could see it being a double-edged sword.
I wonder about that, and I've got to do some more thinking about that, because that is a thing I've been thinking about for many, many years. I don't think it's necessarily new. I mean, we've been here before. There was a period in time where the stories were, it's like the modern superheroic thing is just the old pantheon of the gods over again. And now we're at the point in our culture where we seem to have decided to do away with religion. We still have this massive hunger for those same stories and archetypes, and so they've come into our movies and things of that nature via the comic book route. But I do wonder about that. But the thing is, with those things, the ones that people love are the ones that still have the human stories and the human moments, and they're the ones that do do the best. The movies that always fail are the ones where it's just the spectacle, and they miss those human moments. So the Marvel movies that have done the best are the ones that have those human interactions, and it's those human interaction moments that are the bits that people really love and remember. Like in the midst of the explosions and the bad CGI villain at the end. It's the interactions between the characters that people love, and the human moments that people love. That's why Game of Thrones was so successful, because it was human stories, and it started sort of going downhill when it started focusing more on the supernatural stuff than the human elements.
That's a good observation.
But yeah, this is something I need to think about more, and I'd be interested to check out that conversation you mentioned. So please hook me up with that. I know Jordan Hall has got a theory about this as well.
Yeah, he just came to mind as well on a related note. I've heard him on the Future Thinkers podcast, was where he talked about Game of Thrones as kind of striking the perfect chord on a mythopoetic level, as far as like winter is coming for humanity, and it's time to kind of rise to the occasion and attain more sophisticated levels of collective intelligence in order to kind of pass through this transitional phase relatively unscathed and birth sort of the next thing.
Put aside the petty. The petty, and petty is at an all-time high because we have it so fucking good. The sort of petty concerns are now elevated to the level that, real concerns like dying of cold used to be at. And, Twitter is a wonderful place to watch that playing out in real time, depending on whose timeline you want to clone and observe. This is a tip for anybody, by the way. I don't have trending topics. I've set my local area to Tokyo. So the trending topics on Twitter to me are indecipherable, beautiful Japanese hieroglyphs. And that's wonderful. And, I only follow interesting people. But if you want to look at how others see the world, which is a useful thing to do, there's apps where you can clone somebody's Twitter timeline and just turn it into a list and then just go, and then you can see the world through their eyes. And you can do that with anybody. So you could pick a person that you're interested in for whatever reason. Maybe you think they're insane, maybe you think they're evil, maybe you think they're wonderful, and you can go clone their Twitter timeline, and then you can see the world as they see it for a large portion of their life. Because, a big part of the way that people view the world is through their social media lens these days. So you can go look at that yourself, and you can see what they see, and then you'll see why they think the way they do, which is a useful exercise.
Yeah, that sounds like a really revealing kind of experiment to run. I didn't realize you could do that.
Yeah.
That's cool.
We're in the future.
Yeah, we are in the future.
So basically that means I can clone your experience and experience it for myself in a weird sort of a way. We're a big part of it. And, as we go deeper, this will only become bigger. And, yeah.
Yeah, speaking of being in the future, I've kind of heard you talk about Mars and space migration as a kind of like iconic near-term horizon sort of milestone for humanity.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you talk about that, and sort of beyond that, if that's kind of a milestone that you see as something, worth aiming for. What's beyond that? Like, what as a species should we be aiming for in the next decades, centuries, millennia? What's your opinion on that?
I think that we can do whatever we imagine. So therefore it's very important what we imagine. And we spent a good bunch of decades imagining a terrifying dystopia in which artificial intelligence and robots sort of ravaged the world, and people lost all sovereignty and privacy and were turned into a sort of automatons. You kind of think it's between the Matrix and Terminator, and kind of like 95% of our sci-fi kind of went down that route. And lo and behold, you look around you in 2019, and the world is like a perfect cross between, the beginning of Terminator and the origin story of the Matrix and 1984 and Brave New World and Fahrenheit 9/11 and all these things. That's where we are. That's one aspect of where we are, if you're looking at it, depending on what aspect of the lens you're looking through. The other bit that wasn't investigated as much was the world of Star Trek Next Gen, where we've kind of transcended our limitations to a degree, and our pettiness. We've transcended our pettiness and our bickering and our squabbles and our various isms, racisms and classisms and moronisms, and we're out there in the stars, exploring the infinity, exploring the wonders. And that's where we should be going, and that's what we should be focusing on. And we've told enough Terminator stories and enough 1984 stories. We've told enough warning stories of how bad it could be. We've told so many of those that we've kind of made all those things real. But it hasn't destroyed us yet, which is interesting, which says something about our nature and what we really are, which is like way more than that. Because despite all of that stuff, all of that bombardment, all of the sort of horrors that have been sort of foisted upon the species, we're actually still at our core those deep space next gen explorers. So that's where we need to go, and that's why the whole Mars thing is important, and that's why I love Elon Musk, because he's symbolic of that part of us and that longing for that sort of beautiful adventure, that beautiful intergalactic adventure. And then the other thing I think about is there's a great George Carlin bit where he talks about global warming and stuff, and he's like, oh, these people saying that, we're going to destroy the planet. We're not going to destroy the planet. The planet was here for millions of years, and it will be here for millions of years. We might not be here, but the planet will be here. And he talks about, plastic. He's like, maybe the world wanted plastic. Maybe the only reason we were created was because the world wanted plastic for itself. And I think of that combined with something Grant Morrison once said about how nukes are nature, and either you trust nature or you don't. Nukes are nature in the same way that a beaver dam is nature. And if you zoomed out on the Earth and watched it in a time lapse, you'd see the Earth bubbling a bit, and then you start to see little things poking up out of it, buildings and stuff, and you'd see little rockets going pum pum, little explosions popping out of it. And it's like the Earth is like flexing its tendrils, and it wants to reach out into space, and it wants to go back into space. It wants to go back out there. And that's what we're supposed to be doing. That's what we're for. That's why we're here. And, so that's what we're going to do. And that's a beautiful thing. My soul aches. My soul aches for the stars, because I know that's what we're for, where we're from, and that's where we've got to go.
Yeah, I've heard the metaphor. That was beautiful. I've heard the metaphor of kind of a rocket ship looking almost like a very small sperm, and a planet looking almost like a very large egg, and we're sort of just...
Think of it like spores, right?
Yeah,
think of it
right.
like spores. You ever in like fucking spores, like fungus spores and stuff. That's basically what it is. And it's like, the more I look into that sort of stuff, the more interesting it is, the whole fungus thing, the whole... What's it called, that network under the ground?
Mycelium.
There you go. You know what I mean? And how I saw a picture the other day of the roads, all the roads of the Western world, and how they really do lead to Rome. And what does it look like?
Mycelium.
Yes, it looks exactly like that. It's crazy. And this is like, I go back to, everything is contained within everything on every level. If you zoom out of a thing enough, you keep seeing the same thing over and over and over. So you see that as the veins in an eyeball, and then you zoom out and you see it as a tree, and then you see it as the mycelium, and so on and so forth. So that's the truth of things. And we haven't been born yet. That's what's crazy. Like when a baby is in its mama tummy, that motherfucker is like munching through everything that gets thrown at it, and it's like it's this rabid little thing just consuming everything. And like if it stayed in there, it would kill its fucking mama, it would kill its host, but it has to be born at some point. I spoke with Jordan Hall about this, and he's like, it's like the chrysalis that turns into the butterfly, and we've had this couple of 100 years, and we've been smashing through all Earth's resources and fucking chomping through everything because we have to, because we're about to be born. But we haven't been born yet. That's what's sick. We're just about to be born. We seem to be in this generation that's going to witness butterfly season.
The phase shift, that he and Schmachtenberger talk about, Yeah, I think that...
Being born. We're about to be born.
Yeah, it does seem like when you think about sort of what you were talking about, the image of the earth with these things bubbling out of it and sort of just wanting to reach out into space, it does seem like being or nature or life itself just has this just sort of unquenchable thirst toward basically expansion, evolution, ever greater degrees of kind of sophistication and novelty and sort of flourishing and expanding, and then alongside that perhaps as well kind of ever greater degrees of consciousness and understanding and love and wisdom. And it seems like we're in the midst of sort of the beginning of potentially a sort of an ever more exponential growth curve in that direction as far as the kind of launching off point that we might find ourselves at currently.
Yes, that's evidently the case. You know, the most cursory glance at history shows that is the case. And you know, this is really, really, really early days. And it's going to be absolutely incredible what's going to happen over the next few years. 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 50 years. And we are here for it. Of all the fucking periods in time you could have been born, you're here right now with a front row seat for the fucking birth of this fucking new creature. This fucking cosmic fucking god creature that we are. And that's very dope.
Yeah, what a time to be alive.
What a time to be alive. Woo! And you know, it's like, okay, you're here now. Are you going to fucking sit around moaning and bitching on Twitter and fucking engaging in all this like moronic low-level political fucking nonsense? Or are you going to fucking be engaged in fucking butterfly season? You know, because you can do whatever. It's up to you. It's very, very much up to you. But
absolutely, it's astonishing how it all comes back to attention, and like attention being your most precious resource, and you can either direct your attention into the kind of hyper tribal shitstorm that's happening and get sucked into that, or you can direct your attention toward the kinds of thinkers that you're highlighting in your music and just visionary artists and philosophers, and you can kind of turn your attention toward the cosmos that's just opening up and becoming ever closer to us.
Yeah, well, it's like, it's not just, people think of this as being outside of them, but it's like, you are it. You are, you know, this butterfly, like you are the butterfly, you're part of that butterfly. So you could be a fucking malignant, useless cancer cell, or you could be one of the good cells that's doing something smart and useful. And, you know, that's why Peterson's message has resonated on that foundational level, because it's like, oh shit, like you are actually powerful, motherfucker. Like, you can make a difference, motherfucker. If you, like, make yourself into the best version of what you could be, like, you could fucking actually impact this thing in a positive way. And in the inverse, if you're not what you could be fucking things up, like, irrevocably, you fuck. So, like, it is your duty, it is your responsibility to be the fucking, like, to reach your potential, motherfucker. Like, this is an important time, and the only way we can do this is, you know, if we all fucking be great.
Right? Yeah, because
the greatness, the potential, reach your, be, you know, Goggins. This is why I use people like Goggins and Jocko's voices, right? Because they're just as important. Like the warrior, is was it Plato who spoke about this? It's like, you know, an intellectual who doesn't focus any on his physical. Is useless as the person who only focuses on their physical and not the other. It's like that you need both. You need both.
I think Socrates also talked about that. John might know. He's kind of an expert on ancient Greek philosophers.
Well,
that's the truth. Oh, go on.
Yeah, well, I know that Plato was named Plato because he had wide shoulders and he was quite known for wrestling. So he was a good example of combining the physical and the intellectual. And Socrates was also in the military and quite decorated. So, yeah, that's why I also love that you use Jocko and Goggins, because you don't want to just use people who have their head too much in the clouds. They really bring it back down to like the physical, and just like they're very good examples of just using will. So.
Yeah, and you know, the body and the mind aren't separate things. You know, it's the same. Like, and if one is not being exercised, then the other one will suffer. And it's so easy to see. Like, you're a bit depressed, then you go for a walk or something and you feel way better. It's that fucking simple. You know, so it's like Goggins is incredible. I'm working on this Goggins album right now, and it's like, this is a real life superhero. This is a real life Batman. But no, it's more than Batman, because Batman, you know, was wealthy, so he had that aspect. Whereas Goggins came from nothing, was a fat kid who was beaten, had this awful father, like his mum wasn't around because she was having to work and all this stuff. He was in a town that still had an active Ku Klux Klan. The fucking son of the Grand Wizard used to sit behind him in his fucking math class and fucking throw shit at his head. And what he did was turn himself into a fucking superhero. His way of dealing with this was not to whinge and whine and be a victim or anything. It was to go, okay, God has made me the weakest man on earth, right? So I am going to fucking make myself into, what's he say? He's talking about how, like, God has got a book about everybody, and it's like what they could be if they really, really went in, or what, like, the best version of them and the worst version of them. And like, he's made you as, like, you're there and you're not, you know, you're like a crap version of yourself, but you have potential to make yourself into a good version. But most people won't. And he's like, I'm gonna fucking shock God. I'm going to make myself into something even more than he envisaged. And when I get up there and, like, speak to God, he's going to be like, holy fucking shit, Goggins, we didn't know you could do that. You know what I mean? He's fucking amazing. Like, the fucking willpower, what he's turned himself into from what he was. So then you go, well, if everybody did that, holy fucking shit. You know, it's like, holy fucking shit, we have no fucking idea what we could do. Fucking Mars. That's some fucking pussy shit. Fuck me. Like, you know what I mean? If we all Gogginsed ourselves physically and intellectually, holy fucking shit. You know, and I think that's actually possible. Because, like, you know, for ages people are like, oh, people have no attention span. TV's made everybody retarded. And then suddenly podcasts and, like, fucking Game of Thrones and stuff come along, and everyone's like, oh, actually people can sit there and watch a 72-hour complex narrative. And people are really want to listen to fucking people talking with astrophysicists and nutritionalists and all these fucking ists for hours. Oh shit, maybe we're not fucking retards. And then it's like, as more people do that, you know, every fucking one long podcast you listen to makes you quite a bit smarter. Fucking millions of people are listening to tons of these things all the time. People are getting way smarter, way faster. We have no idea what the upper limits of this thing are. Holy shit!
I wanted to ask something about, I think using Goggins is a good example. I recently listened to his audiobook, Can't Hurt Me, and I was, like, astounded by that.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you because you use Goggins's voice in your work, coming at it from someone who is a musician, do you think that you perceive his words differently because you're playing around with them and you're, like, fitting them together into different sequences? Are you listening to what he's saying in a way that you think is different from the average listener? And do you think that different way of listening is affecting you on a personal level?
That's a good question, and it's not something I've thought about that much because I just don't have time, because I'm just fucking doing this thing every day very fast. It's what it is. It's the same principle. When I started this, when I was 15 doing my GCSE examinations in North Wales, I recorded my notes over ambient music and played them going to sleep as my revision. And this is kind of the same principle. So it's like taking these messages, taking these lessons from all these incredible people. You know, great podcast, obviously. Why is his name escaping me? Tim
Ferriss,
of course. Yeah. So what's Tim Ferriss doing? He's thinking of every fucking accomplished motherfucker he can think of, and then trying to mine, you know, their habits and their wisdom and their morning routines and things of that nature, right? I'm mining these things and turning them into mantras and turning them into, like I said, it's like an audio sigil. So it's a thing. The idea is that it will just go into you. It's one thing listening to someone speak, but it's another thing having those messages burnt into your core as a kind of affirmation. You know, there's another thing Scott Adams talks about, like, because he's a very practical, sciencey guy. But he's like, yeah, affirmations totally works. I don't know why, but affirmations works. He's like, write down a thing that you want, say it over and over and over and over and over and over, which is kind of this. It's the same as Grant Morrison, the chaos magic sigil thing, where you take an intention and you boil it down into a glyph, and you meditate on that. The idea is that you're putting something into your subconscious and setting it to work in your subconscious. So that's what I'm doing. I'm trying to do with this, but then in the process of doing it, I'll spend most of a month on each album at the moment. So it's working. I'm releasing an album every month and spending most of a month making that album. It's like going into these people, like going deep into them, and having it just looping over and over and over these little phrases and things. And it's definitely, there's a comic I used to love called Death's Head, and Death's Head 2 was the second incarnation of Death's Head. Death's Head 1 was a mercenary robot. Death's Head 2 was an AI robot that was created, and then it was sent around the Marvel Universe, and it basically killing all the heroes. And each hero it would kill, it would take up a big piece of them and incorporate that into itself. So it would go around, it'd kill Reed Richards of the Fantastic Four. Now it's got an aspect of his genius. It would kill this Kree. Now it's got shape-shifting abilities and so on and so forth. So it's like every time I do one of these things, I get infected in some way by part of this person's soul. But I don't know if I have much control over which bit of it is. I don't know if that answered the question. Here's one thing with regards to the question is like I'm never rearranging the words to mean something different. I'm always very, very careful to get the original intent across. Now I'll move things around for reasons of rhythm, and I'll move things around left and right and up and down a bit so that they become kind of hookier and catchier or what have you. But I don't rearrange things to have different meanings. Sometimes I'll combine different parts of different talks together because they're talking about the same thing, or because it's conveying something that works together. But I'm very, very careful never to alter the intent of the words.
It seems like you are a quintessential example of a meme spreader, like your kind of iconic Terence McKenna song, where he repeatedly says, "I'm a meme spreader."
Yeah, back in 1991 was that? What I do,
like
I'm a meme spreader, meme replicator. Yeah. I don't believe any of this stuff.
I should make it clear, I don't believe this stuff. I find believing in these high-flown, complicated synthetic systems to come off sort of like pathology. So I entertain ideas, but I don't give belief over. What I do, I'm a meme spreader. What I do, I'm a meme spreader. What I do, I'm a meme spreader. Meme spreader. A meme replicator.
Did you see Joe Rogan on Alex Jones on Joe Rogan?
I've seen part of that interview, I think. It's been a while though, and I didn't see the whole thing.
It was really interesting to watch, mainly because I feel that he was possessed by the ghost of Terence McKenna. He spent like half of it talking about DMT elves and talking about that whole side of reality that Terence was obviously very interested in. And at one point, he literally says, "Look, I don't believe any of this stuff," which is fucking Terence McKenna's catchphrase. And it's like Alex Jones coming out and like talking all this like quintessential Terence McKenna shit, and then right in the middle dropping the fucking Terence McKenna catchphrase. And it's like, is this deliberate? Is he possessed? Is he a conduit at this moment? It's like if you do the same thing over and over and over and over and over and over and over, if you get yourself into flow state, which is this thing I've been doing this experiment since last February, so we're on month 15 of getting into flow state and staying there, like getting in the zone, refuse to leave. So I've been in this place, and everything just compounds and gets more and more bigger and bigger, and coincidences increase and all that sort of thing, and the world becomes magical and nuts. Alex Jones has been doing the same thing for like 20 years. Alex Jones is in a crazy flow state, an absolute lunatic flow state. So it's like, when you're in that flow state, Stevie Wonder used to say, I don't write my songs, like I just open myself up and God writes them. And when I made that last Terence McKenna album, I meant to make one song. And I basically kind of came to after like 20 hours or something, and I had an album. And I didn't even remember most of the process. It was like I'd opened myself up to be sort of possessed by something. And and I wonder about that.
That's fascinating. I've had tastes of kind of what you're talking about, and it is astonishing how it seems that synchronicities kind of start to increase as you start to feel like you're tapping into this flow, and your sort of like small s self or like narrative self is just kind of falling out of the way, and it's more like being itself, like the song of being is just kind of animating your particular instrumentation to produce the song only you can produce, or like the light of being is coming through the prism of your self to produce the kind of light patterns that only you can produce. And at that point you're just sort of being animated by the great flowing river of being, rather than being just kind of an ego, a skin encapsulated ego.
Yeah, so this is it, right? So if you Goggins, if you take what we were talking about, if you Goggins the fuck out, make yourself great, and so it's like you turn yourself into the potential. I like your song thing. So you turn yourself into this great instrument, and then let God play you. You know, like be this incredible instrument, and then allow God to play that instrument. And if everybody does that, you suddenly have the most incredible orchestra the galaxy has ever seen, and you hear the most beautiful song ever imagined. And that's that. You have to do that together. It's no point if like you have an orchestra and like you've got a shit drummer. You know what I mean? That one shit drummer will fuck everything up. You could have the best orchestra on earth. You've got a shit drummer, it'll fuck everything up. All right. So it's kind of important that as many of us as possible. Reach that potential and become great finely tuned instruments, so that we may hear this beautiful symphony.
Absolutely. One thing I'm really fascinated about when it comes to someone like David Goggins is the connection between his early life traumas, which sound like they were ridiculously extensive, and then his almost super heroic performance. John, actually, our co-host here, wrote an article at one point, a great article called Traumatized Supermen, where he talks about this kind of phenomenon in the self-improvement space, where people with a lot of trauma sort of turn self-improvement into another kind of addiction, or almost like they're pouring self-improvement accolades into this kind of void that was left by trauma, instead of actually going in and ultimately healing the trauma. And how it's really important to kind of do both, like heal as well as kind of progress. Maybe John can elaborate more on the meaning, but
I think you did a good job of explaining that.
Yeah, I see that all the time in the manosphere. The so-called manosphere, which is an interesting space, interesting digital space that sounds like a sort of gay disco in space. But yeah, you do. This is part of the whole, integrate the shadow thing. This way, it's like difficult when you're a parent, because it's like it was my suffering that made me. I had a horrible childhood and had a great deal of awful, traumatic, horrible things happen. For most of it. But like I'm very glad of that now, because all of that stuff is what I used as fuel to create Akira the Don. And Akira the Don is useful and powerful, and we've just fucking scratched the surface of that as well. We have no idea what the upper limits of this motherfucker are. Holy shit! It's like you had to integrate, though. There's a great thing that Goggins says. He's like, I was never angry at God. He's like, God, did all these horrible fucking things. It's like, but I never blamed God. I was never angry at God. He looked to himself. All right, what's my potential? What can I do? And then he integrated all that suffering, and he used it all as fuel. And so he's not bitter and resentful. That's the trick. It's like it can't all be about like payback and proving everybody wrong or whatever. That can be a part of the foundation of where it starts, but that can't be everything going forward, because that will consume you. And yeah, there's that example is a good. That's a good example of it. That fitness manosphere area, and it's the integration of the shadow is an important thing that we need to be getting really into and teaching on a school level as like a fundamental thing.
I 100% agree with that. I think it's one of the most useful, valuable concepts that I've ever come across. I think it's still really under discussed, and I've loved how Jordan Peterson has kind of brought this concept a bit more back into the mainstream. Maybe you could briefly explain what the shadow is and give examples of some common things that modern people tend to repress into their shadows.
Well, I mean, the whole this thing that's been going on a mainstream level since 2014, 2013, which is part of the nihilism to psychedelic shift. This what do you call it? I don't know, PC thing, whatever. Is all about suppressing the fucking shadow. It's all about pretending that you're really good. It's all about everyone has capacity for mayhem and horror and evil, and everyone has darkness in them and everyone has light in them. And I always like the way I always think of these things in terms of songs that I've put together. Peterson talks about it in that you should be a monster thing. It's like you can't be trusting someone who so Alan Watts spoke about a potential despotic future in which like virtuous goody-goodies kind of running around the place. And there's no one more terrifying than a virtuous goody-goody who thinks that they're good and thinks that everything they're doing is super good and they couldn't be in any way possibly bad or evil or dark, because they'll do fucking anything. Mm-hmm. They will actually do all the evil things. All the evil things in history have been carried out by people who thought they were doing the right thing. And no one's more likely to do something really, really fucking awful than someone who thinks they're doing it for the right reason and they couldn't possibly be bad or evil or what have you. Whereas, like, so that's one aspect of it. Then you have the aspect of the warrior thing, right? Someone who's integrated their shadow is someone like Jocko. Jocko is aware of his capacity for violence and mayhem and darkness, and he's aware of the darkness and evil that's out there in the world. He's seen it firsthand. And so he's integrated it to the point that he can do it if necessary. If necessary, he could do the most fucked up thing possible. If it really came down to it and it was really necessary, he could do it. But he's integrated to the point that he doesn't. He could if he ever needed to, but he doesn't. So it's like being aware of your capacity for darkness and knowing when to use it and when not to use it. And also knowing that it's there, knowing that there's a necessity for it sometimes, and knowing when to use it and when not to use it is one way of putting it.
Yeah, I loved the description of kind of no one being more dangerous than the person who thinks of themselves as a do-gooder and basically thinks, I'm on team good guys, I'm fighting for a righteous cause, and so thinks that the monsters are all on the other team. And I think Friedrich Nietzsche's aphorism for me like sums this up most perfectly of anything I've ever seen spoken about the shadow. He said, like, whomsoever fights monsters should see to it that in the process he does not become a monster.
Yeah, well, exactly. Frank Herbert spoke about that in Dune. It's like you become what you fight. You become that which you oppose, certainly if you're not careful. And you see this right now. What's amusing about the I don't know if it's amusing. It's something that depends how dark your humor is that day. But the so-called resistance on Twitter, it seems to have become everything that it claimed to be fighting. Like, these are the real racists. These are the real homophobes. These are the real, like, everything they claim to be fighting, they've become. It's terrifying. It's a horrible, horrible thing to witness. But it is how it goes. Goody-goodies are the thieves of virtue, and true virtue does not speak its name. If you're truly virtuous, you don't think you're virtuous and you don't talk about being virtuous because you're just doing it because it's the right thing to do. So people who are running around claiming to be virtuous, anyone with a fucking hashtag fucking activist or hashtag whatever it is in their Twitter profile, these are people you should be fucking scared of.
those who speak don't know, those who know don't speak, kind of thing. Like
Gang. Gang.
Like from one of the ancient OG intellectual dark web members, Lao Tzu said that.
Right.
I think the ancient dark web would be like Lao Tzu, Buddha, Socrates, Seneca, Marcus Aurelius. These guys.
Yeah, exactly. It's crazy. I got really into Marcus over the past year or so. It was like, this motherfucker would have had the best Twitter account of all time. Like, he just wrote tweets. He just wrote fucking the dopest tweets of all time. That's just all he did. Either that or it's like bars. He would have been the fucking illest rapper of all time. It's like everything. You're like, damn, yeah, oh shit, motherfucker, damn fucking straight. You know. And it's really amazing that motherfuckers knew 2,000 years ago what so many have forgotten today. And what we're relearning today at this pivotal point where we're about to be born. It's like, all right, motherfuckers, remember all your shit. Remember all your shit. We've worked out a lot of shit over the past couple thousand years. Let's get it all together. Let's get it in a navigatable, manageable, understandable, foundation, useful sort of form, and let's go forth into space.
Yeah, it seems like almost the great mass of humanity is being sort of summoned to like level up in the way that historically only like extreme outlier individuals managed to do.
That's exactly it. It's like we all have to do it now. It's like you've had a few little motherfuckers every now and again doing it. Like once in a while, oh, there's Buddha, there's Jesus, there's Marcus. Bam! It's like, all right, bitches, we need a fucking million of you right now. Right now. Stop fucking around. We do not have time. And but it's amazing, right? Because now we have the tools to do that. We have the tools to transform that information. We have the tools to learn that information. We're basically at that fucking matrix point of I know Kung Fu being like a thing. You can fucking essentially like download a load of shit. The trick is like working out how to contain it, how to integrate it, how to not be driven crazy by it. You saw that happening in the early days of the internet, right? People would be like driving themselves crazy with too much information, or too much of a certain kind of information, or too much esoteric knowledge, or too much conspiratorial knowledge, or whatever it is. But now you see Generation Z being able to kind of integrate it. That's what Generation Z is doing, is integrating really well. That's why their humor is the way it is. That's why you see this like resurgence of a really sort of dark humor. Because that's how you fucking integrate the darkness, is you learn how to laugh at it. This is one of the things you do. You learn how to laugh at it. You learn how to turn it into power and all that sort of thing. But that's one thing that you see happening in meme culture. Well, you've seen happening in meme culture as we move forward. You've seen the integration of the sort of darkest aspects of humanity, and you've seen people turning that into sort of humor.
I love that dark humor as kind of one means of transmuting the shadow, or the shadow energies, bringing them to the surface. Yeah,
that's why they're permanently outraged and hysterical. It's just fucked, and it's just such an awful thing to do to a person, to infect them with that kind of way of thinking, because it makes you weak. It makes you unable to deal with all the fucking sorrows that the world will throw at you, and the world will throw many fucking sorrows at your ass, like increasingly. More and more and more and more and more. Everybody you know will die and get sick, and it's just going to get fucking more and more horrible. And if you cannot laugh at it, and if you cannot integrate those things, you will be fucked. You'll just fucking wallow around in a constant thrashing state of sorrow and paranoia and anxiety. And that's a really mean thing to do to a person. That's child abuse. So, yeah. But happily, that's much as they try, it's like less effective than memes. You can put like thousands of these people through university, but like one well executed meme will undo all your work and show people the nature of things.
Yeah, that reminds me of Jordan Hall kind of discussing sort of the different forms of collective intelligence during the Trump election, and how kind of the like 4chan meme culture distributed collective intelligence sort of out-weaseled the monolithic kind of blue church of which was still utilizing sort of classic mainstream media channels, which just are sort of yeah, just obsolete in the face of kind of meme culture and this more like rapid, distributed, like almost, almost like yeah.
Once you've heard, once you've recognized the laugh track for the ridiculous persuasion tool that it is, it doesn't work anymore. And it suddenly becomes hilarious and farcical. And if you switch on a cable show and there's a sitcom with a laugh track, you're not laughing at the joke where they've put the laugh track in because it's funny. You might laugh at the ridiculousness of it, at the campiness of it, at the foolery of it, but it's forever done. It's forever ruined and will never work again. And that's what happened in 2013, 14, 15, and really 16. Was that. Like, it was just like that the Wizard of Oz was revealed in his underwear. And you can't unsee that shit. You know, for a lot of people, and really for a whole generation. Certainly for, you know, Generation Z or Generation Amiga or whatever you want to call them. Like, you know, they're not going to unsee all that shit, and they will never take Hillary Clinton or people like that seriously. They will never be able to look at cable news and think it's true and not think it's farcical and silly. That's a whole fucking generation. That used to be just a few weirdos who read The Invisibles or whatever the fuck. You know, that's now fucking millions of people. And that's why the future's going to be fucking great. That's why we're going to fucking Mars and beyond. You know, it's like those motherfuckers are done. They're done. This is a very long and noisy death rattle, but they're dead.
Do you think Gen Z also, as a result of just being kind of disillusioned with all of that classic programming and conditioning, that they're just going to be fundamentally like just less ideological, less susceptible to ideology, and more kind of manifesting on a larger scale Terence McKenna's kind of attitude of basically like, I believe nothing, I'm just kind of open to everything? And do you think that that's a good kind of attitude to have navigating reality?
Yeah, that's what superheroes do. You go, all right, what's useful, what's going to work right now? Which of these many aspects of my Batman training do I use now to defeat this foe? There was a great thing in Doom Patrol, which was a comic Grant Morrison wrote in the 80s, and it's an idea that we've seen all over the place ever since, which is that the split personality person was a superhero. So he had a character who had like 100 distinct split personalities, and she learned through sort of and they were all forged via trauma. You know, and it's that thing that was part of the MK Ultra earlier experiments, right? You'd inflict trauma on the patient, and that would end up in creating a separate personality. And then you end up with a bunch of people with a bunch of different personalities, and one of those personalities is right-handed, and one's left-handed, and one could speak Spanish, and one could drive a car, all that type of thing. And this character, she was called Crazy Jane, learned how to manage all of these things, and then, depending on the situation, access the right one. So it's like, all right, this is happening now, I need to be right-handed, and so summon forth the right-handed version of myself. And this is kind of a thing that we all do, and that's that we are all capable of, and it's a thing that is going to be ever more prevalent. So it's like, all right, take this aspect of this ideology, or take this aspect of this discipline, or take this bit of this, because that will be useful and applicable in this situation. And that's where we're going. So it's like, okay, there's obviously loads of really useful stuff in Christianity. So the previous generation said, throw away Christianity, the church, priests, this is stupid, sky god, spaghetti god, whatever. Just a generation along, it's like, actually, no, that's kind of a stupid way of thinking. That's throwing out the baby with the bathwater. There's some aspects of Christianity that were dumb, or there's some, got infected in certain aspects of it by these predatory creepazoids or what have you, but there's bits of it that are useful. Let's keep the useful bits and use them. Let's utilize that bit. That bit there's good, that bit there's good, that bit there's good. It's like these things are all part of a toolkit that a smart superhero, super god human can use to do their smart super god superhuman shit.
Right, so you just kind of integrate whatever is useful and resonant from all these different sources, and then you end up with this kind of toolkit of many lenses or many reality tunnels. Kind of Robert Anton Wilson talked about like implementing whichever reality tunnel is most useful to you in the moment, and I feel like he's basically talking about this exact sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And in in the in the emerging future, where, I mean, this is starting to happen now, but a world of super gods who have access, with a world of super god cyborgs, because that's what we are. We're all cyborgs. Anyone with a phone is a cyborg. It just hasn't been implanted yet, but it's in your fucking pocket, so it might as well be. So we're all super god cyborgs with access to all of our ancestors' information and skills and techniques and ideologies and schools of thought and all that sort of thing. And we're all going to be fucking Neo Matrix downloading whatever we need at any fucking juncture, depending on the situation. And that will be the skill. That's the skill and the superpower, and it's the thing that we're being developed now. It's the psychic muscles we're developing as a species. It's being able to decide what's the right information or skill to use at any given juncture.
Another Robert Anton Wilsonian idea that kind of seems relevant to mention is he talked about how group identities are we kind of think of our group identities as being very real, and in a certain sense they are, but in another sense they're sort of abstractions that we're overlaying atop the actual fundamental unit of humanity, which is the individual. Groups are sort of like ultimately it's humanity is made up of individual humans. The groups are sort of these abstractions, and so I think that's relevant because when it comes to kind of envisaging this future where we all become superheroes and there's kind of this collective phase shift and we're birthing kind of the next phase of human evolution, we have to realize as individuals that we can't just stand on the sidelines and just watch this movie take place, because it either is made up of individuals, including you and I and all of us listening to this, who activate ourselves as kind of students of life and like Goggins ourselves, like you're saying, or it doesn't happen. It's like it has to emerge on that individual level. So yeah, that's just a thought I had.
Well, this is why intersectionality is awesome, because it's obviously like fucking retarded. But it's what it leads to is the realization that the ultimate minority is the individual, which is and then it's like boom, okay, because that's the truth. So it's like when you do this intersectional thing and go, oh yeah, but what if well, I'm a woman, yeah, well I'm a black woman, well I'm a black woman with one leg, and well I whatever. So you keep going down that, and then you go down to the individual. And then you go, okay, so that's the truth of it. And then you take responsibility for that section, and that section can then work with everybody else to do useful shit. But you have to, it has to be that acceptance, and not just acceptance, but fucking taking responsibility and taking charge of that sovereignty, which is a great responsibility, which is why a lot of people would rather pretend it doesn't exist, because it's hard.
Do you think there's anything else that's useful within intersectionality or postmodernism or kind of like radical leftist ideology? If we kind of operate under the assumption that most any heavily adopted, highly complex set of human philosophies is going to have a variety of useful things in it that we can integrate and kind of like gems, would you say the same must apply to those ideologies? I feel a bit like maybe one of Jordan Peterson's blind spots is that, or at least in the way he expresses himself, is that he sort of just highly kind of dismisses this entire sphere without talking about what kind of the gemstones within it might be. I don't know if you agree with that, or
there's useful. Well, that's what I was saying. It's the throwing out the baby with the bathwater thing. It's like there's useful stuff in every school of thought. So the job is to work out what the useful stuff is and integrate that, without being possessed by the ideology. So humans are very easily possessed by ideologies, for reasons that can be explained by evolutionary biology, I guess. But I think that's the thing that going forward there'll be a lot less of as we become more of this McKenna, I don't believe this stuff type thing. So you go, okay, what's useful within this school of thought? And then integrate that into your personal OS, operating system, interface, and then move on. As regards to what's useful within postmodernism, that's a very big question. I suppose it depends what you mean by postmodernism.
Yeah, I suppose that's a big rabbit hole.
Well, I mean, for example, Vaporwave is a postmodernist art form, and I've taken a bunch of stuff from Vaporwave and used that in the genre I created. And there's a bunch of postmodern stuff within hip-hop, which I believe to be the ultimate art form. And, because hip-hop can take anything into itself and make something new with it. Hip-hop was born of... it's so funny, that, like, the origin of hip-hop. Like, basically, there's a fucking riot in the Bronx, or was it the Bronx? Or was it Queens?
Yeah.
But there's a riot.
I'm not sure exactly.
And a bunch of fucking... like audio stores get robbed, and all of a sudden a bunch of people have got really amazing turntables and sound equipment and are throwing block parties, and they've got a bunch of record players so they can afford to fuck around with them and then work out how to sort of scratch and loop two records at the same time to create a looping beat out of drum breaks and bass lines, and then people fucking shout over that to get people to party more, and that turns into rapping. And then suddenly you've got this art form where you can take fucking, German electro and Brazilian funk and whatever the fuck it is and bring it together to make this new thing. And hip-hop continues to flex its boundaries and bring in new things within its confines to make new things and tell new stories and express deep, harsh truths. The shadow of humanity is expressed within hip-hop like no other place. And that's a good thing.
I totally agree.
That's a good thing. And all the beautiful things are also expressed. And all the transcendent things are expressed. Everything can exist within hip-hop. And hip-hop's a postmodern art form. So, yeah, there's an example.
Yeah, that's a great one. I think Slim Shady is like an iconic example of the shadow being incredibly, masterfully, artistically captured in hip-hop.
And that's also an example of the Goggins thing. Because Eminem, Marshall Mathers... was shy and timid and scared and bullied and weak, and he created Eminem. He created Slim Shady, who was a kind of supervillain, supervillain hybrid, through which he wasn't scared anymore, through which he had powers, through which he was powerful. And that's what Goggins did. That's what everybody. That's what everybody does. Whoever turns themselves into something greater than they are. I mean, rap and comic books have always been intertwined for that reason. Comic books are, the pantheon of the gods. They're all those sorts of stories, but it's often all the ones that really resonated. That's why Stan Lee was such a fucking genius, and why Jack Kirby was such a fucking genius, and why they worked so well together. Jack Kirby just fucking conduited the cosmos. It's incredible what flowed through the cosmos out of his working class army barracks fucking hand. And then Stan Lee sort of married it with the experience of the common and experience, so these superheroes are also regular people who have problems just like you or I. Peter Parker can't get a job and get a girlfriend and all that type of thing. And that makes it relatable. But that ties into this whole, so all these Gogginses and Eminems of this world use that comic book metaphor to create the versions of themselves they needed to create. And now that comic book thing is the biggest thing in the world, entertainment-wise. Avengers Endgame comes out next week. It's about to be the biggest movie of all time. So that means that an unprecedented amount of people now have that framework, now have that metaphor, and they can apply that to themselves.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think you reminded me of another rap lyric. There's a rapper called Offsite. I recommend checking out his work, but he has a great song that's kind of about how people want to take the good without the bad. They want like the good things out of situations, but they want to leave the bad. And there's a lyric where he says like, you want the past of a genius, but not the bullies after class. And he's basically saying this exact thing, like, you know, people want to become something. They admire these people who become great and awesome and extraordinary, but it's so often overlooked that there had to be some kind of momentous catalyst, usually involving a tremendous amount of suffering, that enabled people to dig deep and for their roots to go down to hell so their branches could go up to heaven, to borrow Jung's metaphor, and to ultimately end up in that position. So
yeah, no light without shadow, and this is the eternal quandary of the parent. It's like, all right, so we know that greatness is forged through suffering, but we don't want our children to suffer. So what do you do? And I've thought about this a lot, and there's a lot. I mean, that's a whole podcast in itself. But one thing I think is that, and this doesn't just apply to children, this applies to all of us. It's like, yes, we must suffer, but we needn't suffer in the same way as our ancestors or predecessors. We should learn from their suffering so we don't repeat their mistakes. And we should go ahead and make our own mistakes that are new ones, that move us into new territory. So there will be suffering and there will be mistakes, but it needn't be the same suffering. So my son needn't suffer what I suffered. He can have his own suffering in some new avenue that I never even dreamed of. And then he will forge his own greatness in that fashion. But we must be, all of us, do what we can to not make the mistakes of our forebearers, and that way we move forward efficiently and rapidly, and we go to Mars.
Yeah, I've thought before that maybe a noble aim is to eradicate unproductive suffering. So just like straight up the misery that literally just, leads to tons of people dying and such, that misery is not ultimately catalyzing, evolution and growth. It's just wiping people out. And so, there are a lot of forms of suffering that we can kind of eradicate, but then some of the most fundamental forms of human suffering, like dealing with deaths. I mean, I guess there are people that want to eradicate death, but dealing with heartbreak and death and loss and change and disease and stuff like this. It is. I think there is a strong case that these things are ultimately like the catalysts that bring out the greatest in humanity. So it is kind of a paradox.
It's an interesting thing that it used to be the case that a person didn't really, say a young man, he didn't really become a man until his father died, and he would take over for his father's position in the world or whatever it was, or that death would be sort of catalyst for him becoming a man. And it's like every superhero story, the superhero is an orphan. Or they've got a dead parent. There's always a dead parent involved in it. So what happens in a world where nobody dies? Or what happens in a world where certainly nobody dies while you're still young? And you're all, it's like
nobody grows up.
Yeah, what happens? It's an interesting thing. Because we do have this issue of people not growing up, or people growing up a lot later, and that's a problem. We need people to grow up and take responsibility. I think the responsibility is obviously a massive part of it, but people need to grow up, and people need to be able to learn to do that without death, I guess. So this is one of the things we've got to work out pretty soon.
Right, without death or childbirth, those are a couple things that tend to catalyze people growing up.
Exactly. Yeah, people need to be having way more children and way earlier. That's one issue. Obviously we've talked a lot about the things I'm optimistic about and what's going right with our society and so on and so forth, but we definitely need to be having way more kids way earlier.
Yeah, I like myself, I am 29 now, and I never really saw myself having children. It was not in my kind of life plan. But I do have a 5-month-old son now. Hey. And it's just it's the coolest thing ever, and right, it's so cool, and it's changed me big time. And now when I think about it, I'm so glad, I'm so grateful for it. I feel like I'm at the right age and I'm ready. And I completely agree with you that having children is is a really important thing.
Yeah, having Hercules was the thing that there was the catalyst that made me go fucking supernova. And so, had I done that earlier, I would have gone supernova earlier, I think. So, yeah. So this whole thing of like, oh, wait until you're ready, da-da-da. Like, Hercules was not planned. And had we waited till we were ready, we'd still be fucking waiting. So the waiting till you're ready thing is bullshit. It's just like fucking... why are you fucking here, fucko? Like, why are you on this fucking earth? Do you think it is to fanny around on Twitter, hashtag the resistance, no. Do you think any of that shit will fucking matter when you zoom out fucking 30 years, let alone fucking 100 or whatever? It's like, have some fucking kids, make them better than you, make them not, like, learn from your mistakes, and do that, and that's how you fucking save the world. That's how you make a real difference in the world. You, like, having a kid will make a bigger difference than starting a company or something like that. Like, having a kid and teaching them well is the most powerful thing you can do.
That's part of the problem, is the teaching them well part. That's a difficulty, I think, for a lot of people.
Yeah.
I think...
Well, No, go on.
Your issue of being like a parent, like you kind of want to protect your children from suffering, right? That's kind of like the difficulty that we face that you mentioned, but we also know that suffering is important because it can be a great catalyst for growth. So in my own thinking about this, what I want to pass on to my son is not a life without suffering, but simply the tools for how to suffer successfully.
There you go.
Like, how can one suffer? And I think Goggins also does a great job at this, where he actively seeks out suffering, but on his own terms, and to callous the mind, as he says it.
Exactly. My kid listens to fucking Jocko's podcast.
Nice.
So he wanders around barking good at stuff, and he'll be doing it at me if I forget. He's like, if I get annoyed about something, he's like, no, Dad, good, cause da-da-da, and he'll come up with a little reason for it. Like, runs around with his little 6-year-old ass barking, "No man left behind," at people and things of that nature. So it's like, wow, what a fucking, a fucking generation of little Minecraft kids who listen to the Jocko podcast. Like, what the fuck could they do? Little stoic badasses running around the place fucking with the tools to create whatever they imagine.
Yeah, Jocko even wrote a children's book, right? Like,
well, yeah, this is it. He has a podcast. He wrote a bunch of them. Way of the Warrior Kid, because his kid came home from school with Diary of a Wimpy Kid. He's like, what is this shit? What the fuck is this shit? All right, we need to fix this. All right, I will write my own version. So he wrote his own like Way of the Warrior Kid book about a kid who makes himself strong. And now he's got a bunch of them, and he's got a podcast called the Warrior Kid Podcast. And he like reads little stories and answers kids' questions in this podcast, and my son Hercules listens to it every night before he goes to sleep.
I see. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
I'm curious what the most unexpected thing about parenthood has been for either of you, both of you.
I don't know. I barely remember what life was like before. It's just wonderful. It's just infinitely wonderful, and it gets more wonderful every day. It's just fucking like heartbreakingly beautiful. Over and over, increasingly, and every time you think you've hit one level of like ultimate wonder and glory, then another one unravels before you.
Yeah, I would echo that. I wrote something a few months ago, and I'm just looking at it now. I wrote, staring into your child's face is like looking at the best Christmas present of all time, knowing you'll get to reopen it every day. Yeah. So that's kind of how I see it.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's kind of like you're looking at I think about it a lot, but it's like looking at God and looking like the ultimate potential of humanity. Because like a little kid is perfect, obviously, and a little kid is unlimited potential. Because nothing's gotten in the way for them yet, nothing's ruined them yet, nothing's like quashed their sort of natural exuberance or joy or inquisitivity or whatever it is. Like a little kid is unlimited potential and God and everything glorious that there is. And that's a dope thing to be around. You know, there's a thing in life, life speeds up as you get older for various reasons. Some people think the universe itself is speeding up, and that might be true. But certainly life speeds up because we turn everything in our life into little habit loops. So if you're going to the office every day, that becomes a habit loop, and your brain will fast forward through the experience because it's done it before. So the more through life you go, the more things turn into habit loops, and that's why you remember your childhood summers. They went on forever. It's because everything was new. And you know, as you went through life, less was new, and it just gets, so your brain fast forwards through it. Then you have a kid. It's you're seeing the world through their eyes, so everything slows down again, and like you look up, you know, and you're seeing the wonder again, like you did when you were first seeing it. And that's an amazing thing. And the more you know, so the more you hang around with kids, the more of that you get, and the more kids you have, the more of that you get, and the more grandkids, and so on and so forth. So you know, it's really sad for people who aren't having kids and who are having lives away from kids, because they're just speeding through life, not looking up.
Yeah, I wrote an article about exactly what you're talking about. It was called The Nomad's Fountain of Youth, and it was kind of about how traveling to other countries and new places is one effective means of sort of injecting novelty so as to break out of the habit loops that cause life to kind of fast forward.
Exactly. That's why I move relatively often. That's why I moved. One of the reasons we moved to LA. It's like, I love that there's nothing like that new city feeling when you just walk into a new city and you walk around and like find a bar or something or somewhere to sit down and just like watch the people and soak up the sounds and feelings. It's fucking sick. And you like go in a house for the first time or sleep in a new bed for the first time and watching the way the light falls around the room and hearing all the silence outside and stuff. It's fucking magical. Life is as kind as you let it be. There's something I got from Charles Bukowski, who wrote that after he'd been out at an orgy and it went quite wrong, and I think he ended up shitting himself or something, but he eventually made it back to his squalid apartment and drank the remnants of a bottle of wine and smoked his last cigarette and went to bed, and then woke up at around noon, got up, had his shit, and went back to bed. Life is as kind as you let it be, he said at that point. I was like, oh, that's a good fucking point, Charles Bukowski. Why am I living in this fucking miserable, cold shithole when I could go live somewhere sunny? Holy shit, Charles Bukowski, you're a genius. And it's fucking true. Life is as kind as you let it be. Like, you always have some degree of control over your life. No matter how much of a fucking victim you are and how awful your circumstances are and how bad your father beats you and how poor you are and all these fucking things, you've always got some degree of control, and that's the area you can focus on to make it a little bit better, whatever it is. If you're fucking imprisoned in a cell and you've got no legs, there's a way of making that cell a little better, and you could do it. So do it.
The last of the human freedoms to choose one's own attitude in any situation, choose one's own path, like Viktor Frankl said in Man's Search for Meaning, about being in the Holocaust in a concentration camp.
Yeah, exactly. Motherfucker. Like, how dare you fucking bitch and complain? Like, my fucking granddad was in a concentration camp. Was in a fucking, what do you call it? He was in a Russian one. They took him when he was a little boy from his school, stuck him on the back of a wagon, carted him off to a fucking camp. He never saw his parents again. That's my fucking granddad. That's how close we are to that shit. How dare you fucking bitch and moan, motherfucker? You've got an iPhone.
That kind of reminds me of something I was going to bring up earlier, which is we kind of touched at different points in this conversation on how we almost live in kind of paradoxical times, because while on one hand you can see all these utopian aspects, you can see how these long-term trends have sort of resulted in lower degrees of poverty globally than ever before, lower degrees of violence on a large scale, all these technological marvels, things have never been so comfortable and convenient. at the same time, we've touched on at different times this kind of shadow that hangs over. Nonetheless, in spite of all these beautiful things, at one point you referenced several like dystopian novels and kind of said that you can see elements of those being enacted in the modern world. Yeah. So it's weird how simultaneously it's like, on one hand, I absolutely agree that complaining is not a good strategy for coping with these things, but I do think that it is kind of, maybe in my view, a mistake to dismiss like the challenges and problems that are uniquely kind of modern in this weird utopia dystopia we're in, because on one hand we've never had it better, and on the other hand we're all living in boxes, like living through screens and little like thumbprints on a screen, and we're sort of like, you know, suckling this giant digital teat of the internet, attempting to recover the sort of connection that we felt when we were all in giant cuddle puddles in tribes, when we were basically, you know, like I don't know, polyamorous monkeys or something. And it's like the world we've created in some ways is a paradise, and in other ways it sort of enacts and reinforces this ideology of like the separate individual self that drove so much of the last few hundred years of history. And so it kind of it enacts like alienation and disconnection on a deep level. And I think the reason so many people are so addicted to so many things nowadays is people are trying to fill that fundamental void of like disconnection and alienation, which I think is a problem that you can't quite dismiss in the modern world, I guess.
Yeah, there is no light without shadow. And for every time we fix something, we break something. And that's just how it always has been. And it always will be. It always will be. Because we're going to fix all this stuff and it's going to create more fucking problems. And then we'll have to fix those. And, you know, we will always be searching for something that we lost in our past, because that's also something that's always been... We've always done this ever since we came out of the fucking caves. Second we came out of a cave, it's like, oh shit, it was kind of cool in that cave though. Now we're out the fucking cave. Now we've got all these outside cave problems to fucking deal with. You know, rain, whatever the fuck. But like, you know, that's the journey. That's the journey. So yeah, willful, blind naivety is dangerous and will doom us. And but similarly, fucking complaining about everything all the time isn't going to fucking help either. You know, we have to integrate the shadow. That's what we have to do. We have to work out how to turn the problems into useful things, because you always can. Go, okay, well, how can we sort of harness that and turn it into something? And then we'll create more fucking problems, and then we'll deal with those problems, and we'll just keep moving forward, breaking and fixing and breaking and fixing, lurching from one thing to another. But yes, we do need to be aware. You know, that's why someone like Jocko is useful, because Jocko, one of his core messages is to, you know, be aware of evil, for example. You know, understand the potential for fucking horror, for like willful, malicious evil that humans can perpetrate on each other. Because if you let go of that, then that's when it will happen. The second you think it's not possible, it's like no one could do it, that's when they do it, you know. Yeah, but what was Elon Musk's thing on that? What was his thing? I would rather be optimistic and wrong than pessimistic and right. Was his thing on that. And it's like, if you're sitting around just going, no, it's all fucked, no, phones are evil, no, then bitch, go live up a fucking mountain and carry on being useless. You know, because you're not, it's like we were talking about earlier, it's like, are you going to be useful or not? And you go, well, this modern world is evil and we should all like not have phones and like live as nature intended and be barefoot on the grass up a mountain. It's like, okay, go be barefoot up a fucking mountain on the grass and see how much you're fucking helping everybody else, you selfish cunt. Like, or you could go, okay, I will engage and interface with the modern world and work out how to best utilize the good aspects of it and how to best like mitigate the negative ones. And how to just push us a little closer to heaven and further away from fucking hell. Because, like, it's always been hell. We've always lived in hell. And we've always had the capacity to create heaven. Ever since we first fell out of a fucking fish's ass or whatever it was. Like, shit ain't changed.
Yeah, I think we definitely can't go back and wouldn't want to. And it's just sort of like, how do we integrate this newfound godlike power that we've got with like archaic wisdom and kind of, just like
the archaic revival.
The archaic revival. Find a more beautiful synthesis
That's what it's
somewhere,
just always
maybe.
that, man. It's just like, you know, the answers are all there. We already worked out all of this stuff, so it's like, it's just this constant fucking battle of like of unlearning and relearning and it's a beautiful, glorious, eternal struggle, and there is no plateau and there is no finish line, only death.
Which is unlikely to be a finish line, perhaps.
No. Yeah, exactly. It's just another adventure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And on that bombshell, I need to get back to work. I just realized we've been doing this for over 2 hours, and that's beautiful.
Yeah. This has been a wonderful conversation.
I really like what you guys are doing.
Thank you. Yeah. Really appreciate your thing as well, and all the best wishes in the cosmos.
Well, as this goes on, I mean, like, you guys are in a great position because people are going to be wanting what you're doing more and more and more, and you guys are there already with a vast army. So I imagine we'll be speaking again.
Just before we close the conversation, is there like what is the best way that people can find what you're working on?
You know, I try and
right now.
The way the internet has evolved, it's not one thing anymore. It's like Los Angeles. It's a bunch of separate ghettos interconnected. It's like a bunch of lily pads, and some people only exist on Facebook and never go anywhere else, and some people only exist on YouTube and don't go anywhere else. So I try and be everywhere. So wherever you are, look for Akira the Don and you will find him.
Perfect.
Apart from Snapchat, I deleted my Snapchat. Fuck that guesser.
Nice.
Great. Thank you.
Hey, thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Akira.
He's got clout.
How do I deal with setbacks, failures, delays, defeat, or other disasters?
I actually have a fairly simple way of dealing with these situations. It is actually one word to deal with all those situations. And that is good. And this is actually something that one of my guys that worked for me pointed out to me. He would call me up or pull me aside with some major problem, some issue that was going on. And he'd say, boss, we got this and that and the other thing. And I'd look at him and I'd say, good. One day he was telling me about some issue that he was having. He said, I already know what you're going to say. And I said, well, what am I going to say? He said, you're going to say good. 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 You're going to say good. You're going to say good. You're going to say good. Good. So that's what you always say. When something is wrong and going bad, you always just look at me and say, good. Good. And I said, well, yeah. And I mean it. And that is how I feel. When things are going bad, there's going to be some good that's going to come from it. Oh, mission got canceled? Good. We can focus on another one. Didn't get the new high-speed gear we wanted? Good. We can keep it simple. Didn't get promoted? Good. More time to get better. Didn't get funded? Good. We own more of the company. Didn't get the job you wanted? Good. You can get more experience and build a better resume. resume. You're gonna say good. You're gonna say good. You're gonna say good. You're gonna say good. 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 You're gonna say good. You're gonna say good. You're gonna say good. Good. Got injured. Sprained my ankle. Good. Needed a break from training. Got tapped out. Good. It's better to tap in training than to tap out on the street. Got beat. Good. You learned. Unexpected problems. Good. We have the opportunity to figure out a solution. And that's it. When things are going bad, don't get all bummed out, don't get startled, don't get frustrated. No. You just look at the issue and you say, good. You're gonna say good. You're gonna say good. You're gonna say good. You're gonna say good. 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 You're gonna say good. You're gonna say good. You're gonna say good. Good. I don't mean to say something that's all cliche. I don't mean to sound like Mr. Positive. Find the positive, but do that. Focus on the good. Focus on the good. Take that issue, take that problem, take that issue, take that problem, and make it something good. Make it something good. And bring that attitude to your team. Do. You go forward. You're gonna say good. You're gonna say good. You're gonna say good. You're gonna say good. 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 You're gonna say good. You're gonna say good. You're gonna say good. Good. And lastly, I'd like to close this out. If you can say the word good, guess what? It means you're still alive. It means you're still breathing. And if you're still breathing, well then hell, you still got some fight left in you. So get up, dust off, reload, recalibrate, re-engage, go out on the attack. And that right there is about as good as it gets.
Thank you for listening to the High Existence podcast. I hope you found that song good, and I hope that you have a very good day and use that phrase, that mantra in all the things that you do, all the difficulties that arise. I personally love that expression now after hearing Jocko Willink explain how he uses it. If you loved that episode, want to hear more like it, make sure to subscribe to this podcast and leave a review. Just takes a few minutes and you'll be hearing from us again very soon. Much love.